Good morning. I hope all of you had a good weekend. We're going to begin the next novel, The Knife of Never Letting Go. And I think one of the first things you noticed was the print change and how the noise seemed to influence everything in the novel and trying to figure out what the noise was and how it all happened. But before we even get there, there's some other things I think we need to talk about. And so I'm going to begin by running through those things, and we'll probably get to the noise in the next class period. As I read this novel, and this is my third time through it, I guess, I had a lot of early questions, and there were also a lot of little things that I connected to other novels. And one of the things I want to keep stressing is the idea that we should work to make connections. Those of you who are at the Great Plains Writers Tour, or Writers Conference, whatever it was called, I think there were a couple of things there that really reinforced to me the need to make connections. One of them, I think, was the poem about Edward Hopper and Emmett Till. Edward Hopper, the painter, Emmett Till, the young African American man who was, I'll use the word martyred, because he allegedly whistled at a white woman. Those kinds of connections, I think, are difficult to make. I thought the poem did a great job of making them. The ones that I'm going to be talking about in the novel here, I think, are a little simpler, but I still think it's important to think about making connections every chance you can. Before we get to the connections, I think let's take a look at some questions. Page 3, the first thing you find out when your dog learns to talk is that dogs don't got nothing much to say about anything. My cat probably agrees with that. She's not a fan of dogs. But as I'm looking at this thing, I do have the question about why can the dog talk? It seems to me that we are kind of tossed into the middle and we have to find out why the dog can talk. And then we've got a boy with a talking dog. It seems to me that this should be an advanced place, perhaps. This should be something um, with scientific developments far beyond ours. And yet he is using language like year, Y-E-R, year. And then the cynic in me frequently wonders, do normal humans have much to say ever? Okay. Next, I keep having more questions. I won't officially, and officially was highly italicized in the original, become a man for 30 more days. The plans are being planned, the preparations prepared, though I'm starting to get some dark pictures about it. I will become a man, and picking apples in the swamp is not a job for a man or even an almost man. Excuse me. So, in this world, what makes manhood or adulthood official? What darkness is involved in the preparations? We just read the Ishmael Bay book, um, A Long Way Gone. The preparations for the naming ceremony were a joyous occasion. Preparations for most ceremonies are joyous occasions. This one doesn't seem to me. And then, what are the jobs for men? As we're in this world, what are the jobs for men? Who's prescribed those jobs? Who's defined those duties? And why is picking apples not a job for a man or almost a man? And then, as the noise thing starts to become the dominant force, at least in this early part of the novel, there's this whole question of if there ain't nothing but noise in the world, nothing but the constant thoughts of men and things coming at you, I do have this question of why aren't there women? And then there's this question about okay, if everything he's believed about the noise isn't true because the noise has stopped and that's impossible, what about these other things aren't true? And we'll come back to the highlighted parts about the SPACs, the war, the germ that drove men mad, and spelled in for all spackle. We'll come back to that in a future slide. But it does make me question, and one would think it should have made the character question, you know, why didn't Todd think about what else isn't true? But to go on to the connections. The first one that struck me was there's a hole in the noise, and that's impossible. And the conclusion was, so something impossible has to be true. How often have I said to you, when you have eliminated the impossible, whatever remains, however improbable, must be the truth? Todd, I think, is echoing Sherlock Holmes, copying Sherlock Holmes's logic without the vocabulary. I mean, I think it's important to remember he's saying your previous slide or two, we had the spelling of preparations. Todd is not educated. Todd does not have the language skills that Sherlock Holmes does to be able to tell the difference between improbable and impossible. But it's going through the same sort of logic. It's happening, therefore there must be some truth in it. And Sherlock Holmes, eliminate the impossible, however improbable the thing remains must be the truth. Another classic connection early in the book, at least for me, was to Pip and Great Expectations by Charles Dickens. When Todd says men lie and they lie to themselves worst of all, I immediately thought of the line, all other swindlers upon earth are nothing to the self swindlers. The idea that people lie to themselves and that they lie to themselves worst out of all the lies they're going to tell strikes me that it was a lesson young Pip had to learn the hard way because he was lying to himself throughout a big chunk of the novel. And it's something that young Todd already has as a bit of knowledge, as a bit of wisdom. And so I think it's important when you look at the book to think about connections to other literature, other famous things that you've read, because I think a lot of times, either intentionally or unintentionally, authors borrow from those who came before, or they want readers to think and make the connections to works that have come before. And to make it a little more recent, I think this might be a contrast rather than a similarity. The previous two seem to be pretty similar. But the drunk people. Drunk noise is like a drunk man, blurry and boring and dangerous. As opposed to Paper Towns, talking to a drunk person was like talking to an extremely happy 3-year-old. First of all, there's the tone difference here. Boring and dangerous is a far different tone than extremely happy. And so I think we're getting this idea that this novel is going to take us to a darker place than Paper Towns did. And then finally, for me, and probably this is just because I'm old, and probably this is because, um, my mother lives in a town of about 350 people, and, we're not that far from towns like Meckling or Gayville, where it seems to me that this is kind of what's happening. Not that there's all that much left of it. No more. One shop used to be two. One bar used to be two. One clinic, one jail, one non working gas station. Again, bits and pieces of this. My hometown's down to one bar. It's got one grocery store. The hardware stores that used to be there are closed. The gas station kind of has a mechanic in there who works ever so often, but my mother's buying gas at the grain elevator. They set up some pumps and you stick the card in and go. This just reminded me of my hometown a lot. And then if you keep going, one short bit of road running through the center, paved back in the day, never upkept since. Uh, the streets are probably okay in my hometown, but the sidewalks need a lot of work. And I think there's a lot of towns that I've driven through in the past 5-10 years in western South Dakota that fit this description. So I think in a lot of ways, the novel is giving us a picture of rural America in a lot of places that people are just moving away from for whatever reason. And it's harder and harder to have upkeep, and it's harder and harder to have the basics: a shop, a bar, a church. One of the things I'm going to have you do um, for your daily writing is, how is Todd like the previous three protagonists? Think about 3 or 4 ways, and you can that he's like each one. Pick one. So how is Todd like Ishmael Bay? How is Todd like um, Q? And how is Todd like Stanley? And just find a different one. So Todd is like Stanley this way. Todd is like Ishmael this way. Todd is like um, Q in this way. Gives a couple of concrete examples and kind of go from there. So that's your daily writing. But I do think when we make connections to the big things, we should also make connections to the character. And again, the class is always going to be character, conflict, connection, and theme. Those are certainly going to be big elements of it. And so, how's this character like those other characters? It's not just esoteric Sherlock Holmes connections, it's connections that I think, how is he like other characters in young adult literature? Moving on in the presentation, however, truth and lies. We're going to come back on, as we did with Holes, and talk about what was this novel about and what are the things that readers, the intended readers of this novel, should get from it. And this novel, I think, those of you who are 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, you may well be the intended readers of this novel. And I think this novel still has things for old men like me. One of the things, obviously, is truth and lies. If you get a chance, do the YouTube search for Johnny Cash and What is Truth? Because I think in a lot of ways, we saw some of those truth and lies questions as we were making the connections earlier and asking questions. But I think the idea of what is truth and what is true and how can we know the truth is a big chunk of what Ness is trying to get us to think about as we take a look at um, this novel and the two sequels. The idea of what is truth is certainly a big deal when the hole in the noise is impossible. And then again, Todd should be thinking about, okay, did the SPACs release the noise germ? Was there a noise germ? Were there SPACs? Since they apparently have been all killed off, um, was the germ that killed half the men and every single woman? Um, are we sure that my mother was killed by this noise germ? There should be all sorts of questions running through his head because if this big thing has been taken away, what about the rest of it? And then we're starting to get this idea that noise ain't truth. The noise assaults him, the noise comes at him from every angle possible, but noise is what people want to be true. And the difference between what people want to be true and what is true, as Todd says, could ruddy well kill you if you don't watch out. And I think the idea of what do we want to be true versus what is true, the idea as the picture has of fake and fact, all of those things I think are important 2020 election year things to think about. And how can we get through the truth? And quite frankly, to use the metaphor that the book has, how can we cut through the noise to get to the truth? This probably could have gone in the connection slide as well, but Ben is talking to Todd, and Todd says, the things you know right now, those things ain't true. And he's almost treating Todd as if Todd is the kid who is just being told there is no Santa Claus. And I'm sorry if I've caused any psychological damage with that last statement. But again, this idea that people have had the world has been um, pulled, the wool's been pulled over your eyes, you've been blinded from the truth by things. Todd is coming into that sort of thing. And now the question is, what do you do with the new truth? We're going to talk about archetypes down the road. One of the big archetypes is Saul on the road to Damascus, where he gets hit with the light and he's blinded and he learns a new truth. But the question becomes, what do you do with that new truth? And we talked about it with Q and his epiphanies. Todd's going to have some of those same situations. And then this idea of you know, handling the truth. Todd attempting to handle the truth. Todd attempting to deal with the truth in this new world for him. This world where everything he believed for a second has not been true. The idea that there were only men, that the idea that all the women had been killed by the noise germ, the idea that um, everything people were telling him was true is gone. And the idea that there was no other place is gone. And now he has to leave. There is no other place, or there is another place he has to go. Things that he didn't know about are all of a sudden being tossed at him. And, I have the Jessup slide up, or the Jessup picture here in the slide. But I think the question is not only he couldn't handle the knowledge, he couldn't handle, or excuse me, he couldn't handle the truth. He couldn't handle the knowledge. And I think both of those things are important distinctions as we go through this novel. There's knowledge, there's knowing things, and then there's truth. Ben said that in the previous slide. I think we're going to find that as we keep going through the novel as well. And then as he's going through, we have this kind of distinction between what I think a lot of people would call the little white lies and the big, huge lies that Todd has all of a sudden had to deal with. That everything in his life has been nothing but a lie. I think that again, I think changes who he is as he develops as a character. And we'll kind of have to keep thinking about what does the fact that everything he has ever believed has been pulled out from underneath him, what does that do to him? And how can he recover? How can he change? How can he still become this character that we want him to be, or that we want to identify with because he's the protagonist? And then Todd also, I think, is coming into the thing of lies becoming true and things being spoken and being true. And at this moment, it seems odd to me that he is sort of forgetting that there's a difference between what people want to be true and what is true, and that difference can ruddy well kill you, I think is what it said in the previous slide. And so when you take a look at this thing, the idea that Viola is speaking the truth, and that Viola is making things come true, and that Viola is able to impersonate Wilf, is just kind of messing with his head in a way that perhaps it wouldn't mess with ours, but it's certainly messing with his. And there's almost this biblical thing about speaking the truth, and the truth by become, or the words become true by speaking them. We'll probably pick that up in the archetype section as well. But the idea of how do you make something true? And when something becomes true, it changes the world. Even if it's briefly, it changes the world. Also, the idea that lies are vivid, truth is vivid, and you've got both of them kind of being the same thing. Because one is believed strongly, it does as much good or damage as the other. And a lot of this novel is about the damage of the lies. A lot of this novel is about the difficulty of holding on to the truth. And again, I don't want to get political, but in an election year, whether it's 2020, 2016, 2012, 2024, I think distinguishing truth from lies and seeing that both are equally vivid is an important skill that, if nothing else, the book should remind us to take seriously. Okay, we're going to wrap it up here. You've got the preview for the next presentation. We'll start with the noise, and we'll kind of move from there. Um, Everybody have a good day. The daily writing is posted on the D2L sheet the way it always is. But remember, it's also you also had it. How are the protagonists the same? And those of you watching this one today, hopefully see you in class on Wednesday.